Our next speaker is a woman I envy so much. When I grow up, I want to be like her. She's a professor of women's studies at the University of Alberta, specializing in the social, economic, and gender affairs of West African women. She has gone through every rigorous, I always use that word because I am an African child. She has gone through every rigorous an African girl child goes through to become a woman. She says the length of her name does not dictate the years she is adding on. Dr. Phil is actively involved in building across-Atlantic linkages with scholars, academic institutions, and local communities to improve conditions of people in Africa. She's working in conjunction with both local and international NGOs as well as social agencies to bring this passion to materialize. Dr. has not only added a long list of academic and social laurels to her name, she has also authored many books, including Negotiating Power and Privileges. Ladies and gentlemen, permit me to invite Dr. Okay, I'll leave that one. Phil Okeke to speak to us tonight. Thank you so much. I made this for you, and nobody wants to stand there. I think I would actually stand.
I don't have a whole lot to say, so I think I will stand here and say what I have to say. Yeah, thank you. Somehow I managed to live in 2 continents, or to live and work in 2 continents. One thing I want to say more today is about the future, and that is what concerns me more, because on this part of the continent, much of what I do is research on African immigrants, including their children. And so I think a whole lot about the future. If you work with the children and you hear more about what they have to say, it worries you and you think about the future, what you can do to change the future. I have to say that I am not a historian, so I'm not here to tell you history. I'm rather going to tell you about history and why what is Lee and his group is doing is very important to us and should be to every African living across the ocean. Usually I teach, there's a course I teach, an introductory course I teach at the U of A, and one of the topics I teach is, what is history? I ask my students, what do you think is history? And they're all looking at me as if you don't know what history is. We come to the point where we say, history is what happened in the past, and I ask them, everything that happened in the past? I said, well, no, it's the important things. And I say, who decided what is important and what is not? They're all looking at me, and I said, let's start with the world wars. How many world wars have we had? They tell me we have 2. And I said, what if I tell you that in both world wars, a good chunk of 2 continents were not part of that world war, had no idea what was happening? Would you still call them world wars? And they said, oh, we really didn't know. We weren't born there. I said, well, I'd like you to know. So think from today and ask yourself, would you call them world wars? And I asked them, a lot of the traditional history you read, a lot of them will say things like, in 1864, so and so general passed a certain bridge. What do you think about that? Is he the only one who passed that bridge that day? I said, well, no. I said, did you know what my great-great-great-great-grandfather was doing that day? No. What I was really trying to bring them, eventually for them to see, is that history is selective. You don't write everything that happens in the past. You write some of what happened. And what you write is what you consider important. What it means also that history is subjective. Because what I say is important is not what you may think is important. But if I happen to be the writer, I choose what I think is important And what I'm trying to get to tell you, which I don't tell my students here, because that's another part of, we are talking about women's history, is if you don't write your history, someone else will write it for you. Yes. That's what I'm trying to get for you to know. And I think you already know that, but simply to impress it upon you. It is not surprising that much of what we know about Africa today is not written by Africans. Part of the reason is also because we have what we call an oral tradition, which means we store knowledge by passing from one person to the other in terms of stories. But that you know by now that that one doesn't have as much currency today. You need to tell stories, but you also have to write things down for generations, for centuries. And I tell students, I say that we have to write these things because they are important for the future, for the people who will not be here. I would say more about this if I'm teaching students back in Africa, when I talk about what is history. I talk to them about a few examples. One of the examples I give them is the story of the prairies. Many of us, I'm sure you know, knew more about North American and British history than you know about your own history. They used to ask us, there are many things we chant, but one of them I remember we used to chant is, when we say the prairies, we all chant the bread basket of Canada. We don't know what bread is because we don't make bread in our culture. So to put a lot of bread in a basket doesn't make sense to us. It was only when I came here and understood what it meant to be the bread basket of Canada. We knew a lot of people. A lot of people in Nigeria today know who Mungo Park is. Mungo Park discovered a river called River Niger. And on that thing he recorded, I saw a river today in whatever time, and it's called the Niger. A whole country was born, Nigeria. Those who live by the Niger area. My brothers and sisters, that river is not River Niger. My grandfather calls it Osimiri. But Osimiri is not written anywhere. Everybody knows, most people who went at least in my own time knew about Christopher Columbus. These histories did not make sense. But we learned them. But how many of us knew about the great kings of Africa? How many of us have heard of Queen Amina of Kano? This is a woman that ruled kingdoms in Africa. One of us probably do not know about Queen Amina. But you will ask yourself, is it really about knowing? It's not about knowing. It's also about belonging. It's about knowing who you are and where you come from. We are all damaged goods in one way because our histories have been checkered in terms of what we learned. Our children are in a much worse position because they don't have a lot of what we have, the language, the ethnic groups and all of that. So I tell the people I work with here, we are building a new Africa. Africa that we don't know much about. We don't have the blueprints. We're just putting it together. We're not putting it together for ourselves. We're putting it together for our children. Our hope is that in about 100 years' time, when none of us is here, any African child, African Canadian child can say, this is what history is. This is what it means to be African. But don't just say this is what it means to be African because they know what is African today and we don't like what they think. It is to say this is what it means to be African and I am proud of being African. And I can tell you more about what it means to be African. It is about belonging. And I will end my story by really asking you to support foundations like this one because the children I work with, they don't know what it means to be African and they are not very, very sure. And they also do not really want to belong to it because of what they have read. So if you want to change their mind, if you want to build the Africa you think you want them to know, if you want to write your own history, the history they will read, this is today that you start writing it. Block by block by block. It is the kind of foundation that is opening. That is just a tiny little block. But you have to keep building it that until when we leave, there will be a building they can go into and say, welcome to Africa. I will tell you about it. That is what we have come here to do, and I'm really asking you to please support me and his group. Thank you.